Face to face with a child who doesn't read, the first thing I think about is, who are you? Where are you coming from? One sad thing about education is that quite often it doesn't have time to engage with children as individuals. But we have to make time to engage with a child and find out what is of interest to that child, what is it in that child's background that might get them hooked into a book of any kind. So I can remember, for example, talking to a girl. She was about 11 and she said she never read, she was bored of reading, she could read, what was the point in reading? And I asked her, I noticed that she had a Spanish name, and I just said to her, why have you got a Spanish name? And she explained that her parents, or no, it was grandparents, I think it was, had come from Spain as a result of the Spanish Civil War. And this was something that had been in her family, and they talked about it. So we sat and talked a little bit about what she knew about the Spanish Civil War. And then I said, would you be interested in reading a book about that? And she was. Instantly, there was a hook that related to her culture and her interest. So that's one angle. But the other angle is we've forgotten to take children to places where there are books that might interest them. So there is quite a simple process where if you take children into a very attractive and interesting library and show them books that might interest them and talk with them while you're showing them, then all sorts of remarkable things happen. I remember a child who was about 8, and he said he was interested in history, but he found history books difficult. And it just so happened there was an Asterix book lying there. And he picked up the Asterix books and said, what's this? And I said, well, it's a cartoon book, but it's about a thing that happened a long time ago. Or supposed to. It's a sort of funny book, but it is about when the Romans were in France. And he started looking at it, and suddenly he was hooked. Well, those are the kinds of conversations that we have to have with reluctant readers. It's about who they are, where they are, and getting them in front of and with books that are exciting. Whole school policy on reading books out loud. That's right the way across the school, from reception to year 6. There must be the idea that every child gets to hear books read out loud. This is how children get the written cadence into their heads. Some children get it from reading quietly to themselves, but most children don't get this business of the written language easily and with, if you like, the facility that maybe teachers themselves have. This is absolutely crucial, because reading is not just a matter of sticking words together. It's getting the way in which sentences flow, the way in which they flow within the sentence, many clauses, and then from one sentence to another and into a paragraph and building into chapters and into books. Now, the way you get that is from exciting reading out loud, and you want that right the way across the school, and you want every child to be engaged with the idea of reading out loud, the older ones reading to the younger ones. A whole school culture on reading out loud, absolutely crucial. And it's social, it's exciting, people laughing together and crying together, ever so important. Next thing is, how do you talk about books? You have to have a whole school culture on talking about books. So we've got to get away from the idea that when you're faced with a book or a piece of writing of any kind, that the first thing you do to children is ask them questions that you, the teacher, already knows the answers to. You have to get away from that. You have to create an atmosphere in which the kinds of questions and the kinds of talk you have is in the spirit of inquiry and discovery. So this means asking questions that you don't know the answers to, like, what do you think of that person? Or maybe they're like, what does this remind you of? Or has anything ever happened like that in your life? These are the kinds of questions we have to get going so that we can really engage with books as exciting and important things. Children have to learn how these things are important, because at the moment in their culture, probably they think telly is important, or computer games are important, or chat rooms are important. So if you want to make books important, you have to make the talk really matter, really has to engage with their lives. And then the third thing, and it's kind of obvious, but it isn't, we have to think about libraries. We have to think about free books for children. So every classroom, has to have a library, every school has to have a really good library, and we really have to bed the children into using the local library. And this actually means involving the parents as well. I've had the experience as a parent of going along to parents' evenings where the teachers have talked about literacy and there have been no books in the room and no one has mentioned the local library. So there are plenty of parents who don't even know what is available in the local library or even where it is or what they can do. So what we have to do is get parents and children in the full knowledge there's a library down the road, where is it, how often can you go, how many books can you get, but at the same time that's going on is children have got this wonderful array of books in the classroom, and often the local library can provide the books for the classroom, and also the library in the school must be like a hub. It must be one of the key places in the school that really matters. One of the distressing things for me is to see money and resources going into ICT rooms, fine, and libraries turning into these kind of, I don't know, sort of shed at the bottom of the garden that doesn't matter, and books are just piled up and torn up and lying in all sorts of places and so on. No, we have to really make the library a key place in a school's life. I would just simply send out a directive to every local authority and every school asking them to devise a policy on how to create book-loving schools and book-loving communities. Let's get away from the idea that what the job of the Minister of Education is to send out directives to every moment in the day and how every teacher must do this and must do that. No, a directive, a requirement, if you like, for teachers and local communities to devise these policies for themselves. You know, it would be different in different areas. It would be different for different schools, for different classes. But basically to devise ways in which you can get everybody reading. And that means everybody, not just 5%, 10%, 20% reading books, but every single child in every single community reading books from beginning to end. That's what you're going to be asking as the Minister. In fact, I have asked the Minister to do that. In fact, I've asked him twice, and I'm waiting for a reply. We can read poetry in a variety of ways, and sad to say, along with excerptitis that we've had in primary schools, we've also had anthologyitis. Anthologyitis is where the only way we come across poems are in themed anthologies. Now, what this means is that the poet disappears, because poems are only in an anthology by virtue of the fact that it's a football collection, so they're all football poems, or it's a spring collection, so it's all full of spring poems. The only problem with that is that poems are written by poets. So if you really want to engage with how poems are written and why poems are written, you've got to get back to the poet. Who is the poet? What motivated that poet to want to write that poem? Where's that poet come from? Who is she? Where was she born? So, along with anthologies, how can we involve parents actively in the reading of books and choosing of books for their children? Can they help run the bookshop? Can they help perhaps run the library? Could they set up a book group of their own? Could we have a book swap? Could there be a kind of book basket in the front hall where what you do is when you finish a book, you drop it in and you can pick out a book? How are books displayed in the school? Are they spine out or are they face out? If you put picture books spine out, it's meaningless. You have to display books so they're face out in the classroom, in the corridors, in the library. What kind of events can you create in a school library to make that library a place where the children are desperate to get in? How can you beg, borrow and steal to fill that library with extra books? Can you get the parents organising events? So you have to think about all these things. What about informing? How can teachers inform themselves of new books coming out? Well, there are magazines specially aimed at teachers and librarians. Books for Keeps and Carousel, two great magazines that tell you of all the books coming out with really good reviews. I'm delighted to support Literacy Evolve because it puts whole books at the centre of the curriculum. This is what we need. We have to get back to the idea that we read a whole book and that we surround a book with a whole set of interesting and fascinating resources, whether that's books or the internet or film, and that we help teachers engage with books that maybe they haven't come across themselves, and routes into new books and new exciting books that are around, and also helping children develop strategies for getting into books. We need all that, and Literacy Evolve provides that. I've often worked with children in short films, and the great advantage of a short film is that it leaves so many questions unanswered. So there, if you like, at every point or angle, both during the film and after it, there are a set of questions we can ask. Who is this person? Why are they thinking that way? What motivated them? It's a form of hot seating that teachers would be familiar with. You can be in the film and you can hot seat the child as that character or as that child, and you can say to the child, you can say, what are you thinking now? What can you see? What are you hearing? Why are you thinking that? And this can turn into poems, it can turn into other stories, it can turn into a debate. You can hot seat two children at the same time who are, let's say, that child and that child in the film, and get them debating. So what, if you like, these short films offer is a kind of springboard, but a springboard only suggests as if there's kind of one taking off point. It's like a multi-springboard. So short films, huge potential for writing and creating, if you like, many texts that would surround a film. Poems, stories, and maybe, for the older children, almost like a kind of short novel that they could write. For years 4, 5 and 6 in particular, they've been presented with excerpts and extracts. I think of it as an illness, actually, called excerptitis. And what happens is that week after week after week, children are presented with chunks of a story, short chunks of a story, and then immediately quizzed on it. This isn't reading. This isn't about reading with feeling and discovery and investigation and feeling the power of story, of the idea that what will happen next? Will I be frightened? Why does this matter to me?